Welcome to the Association of Lifelong Learners at Alpena Community College. Today we have a discussion of the righteous mind based on work of Jonathan Haidt. Pastor Bob Case is with the First Congregational United Church of Christ, and he is anticipating enjoying full retirement soon. Please welcome Pastor Case.
Thank you. I want us to pretend that we're sitting down in a circle and we're just kind of more informal and talking, but I understand there's some people on Zoom, so I have to make this look more official. Every once in a while I read a book that just blows my mind, and I think, I wish everybody could read that. There are two books that's happened to me recently. In the last presentation I made was Jesus and John Wayne, and why white evangelicals are corrupting the faith and fracturing the nation. Written by a very conservative Christian who I probably disagree with theologically a significant amount, but I think it's important to read people that you disagree with, and I found out I didn't disagree with her at all. This is my favorite Jewish atheist. The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And this book, if there was a book that I could give everyone in the United States to read, and I would say, please read this book, and not necessarily agree with everything in it, but I think it opens up a lot of understanding of why our country is where it is right now. In a little bit, we're going to be hearing from him. I have selected about a 20-25 minute portion of one of his lectures that kind of hit some of his central ideas. Basically, he says the problem that we have is that, number one, we're too righteous, and number two, we're too quick to demonize. And what he says we need to understand is the Yin-Yang Principle, that we need each other. Several times during the book, he says something like, if you don't know your opponent's opinion, you do not know your own. In other words, the only way you get to know what you really believe is by talking to people who disagree with what you think. And so therefore, you can bounce ideas off one another, and you can become wiser and begin to sift out what is right and what is wrong in your own belief system. And so he says that we are becoming so much more tribal, so much more unable to talk to people who have differing opinions than our own. We're not going to see the first part of his lecture, which I really wanted to show, but it's very important, where he does an analysis of where we are in the United States right now. And it traces back the differences between the liberal and conservatives in the United States, the Democrats, the Whigs, the Republicans, all the way back. And what it finds out is at the Civil War, the difference between the Republicans and the Democrats were like this. It was a huge, huge gap. Of course, we were at war with one another, right? We are more divided now than we were at the time of the Civil War, according to social studies that are being done. And he has several of those that he points out that we are now at the most divided as we have ever been in the history of our country. And he talks about why is that and what can we do about it. He then gives some ideas about how we can, he doesn't think we can overcome it, at least not in the near term. But how can we ameliorate it? How can we make it less strident? How can we begin to cooperate with one another? He does that by taking a look at moral philosophy. Now, I taught philosophy and ethics at the college here, and there are two main branches of thought in philosophy and ethics. There are more than that, but there are two main. One is utilitarianism, and that is that you're supposed to do what is right for the largest number of people. Okay? You look down, you figure out what is the action that I can do that is right for the greatest number. The other one is deontology, which is basically means rules, and that is what rules must I follow? And regardless of what the outcome is, are there certain rules that I must follow? He says both of those are wrong. He spends the first part of the book talking about them, and also something called virtue ethics, which he doesn't get into, which I'm sorry, because I think that has a lot to say about how we do ethics. I'd like to read part of his conclusion. I've argued that we are more concerned about looking good than being good. This is, by the way, if you got it, it's in the front. Intuitions come first, and strategic reasoning comes second. We lie, cheat, and cut ethical corners quite often when we think we can get away with it. And then we use our moral thinking to manage our reputations and to justify ourselves to others. We believe our own post hoc reasoning so thoroughly that we will end up self-righteously convinced of our own virtue. That's his conclusion. He says that there are three things that we need to know. And I'm just going to highlight these, and you might pay attention during this talk. First is that intuitions come first and reason comes second. The problem with the other ideas is they think that we are really very rational people. But what he says and what he tries to prove is that we are basically little people riding on elephants. And what he means by that is our intuition, our gut feelings are elephants. And the elephants tend to lean either to the right or the left or back up or go forward. And we as riders are basically on there wherever the elephant wants to go. Now, we can make some corrections, but our corrections always have to take into account the elephant. And the elephant is our intuitions, our gut feelings, and our emotions. And if you think most of us, when we make ethical judgments, we don't sit and say, okay, let me list all of the pros and all of the cons. Very rarely on any ethical issue do we do that. We just have a gut feeling that this is right or this is wrong. And then we find things that back up why what we think is right or wrong. So he says, first of all, intuitions come first and reason comes second. And that there are 6 foundations to moral thinking. He thinks there's probably more, but there are 6 major foundations. And he uses the example of taste buds. We all have 5 different taste buds, sweet, and tart, and savory, and salty, and and you can take those 5 and you can rearrange them in a whole bunch of different ways. So as you move from culture to culture, we all have those 5 taste buds. But some people like savory food, and some people like me like chocolate. And when I'm done eating chocolate, I want more chocolate, because that's the one that seems to predominate for me. But I've got all 5 of those taste buds, and we all arrange those taste buds in different ways, and different cultures doing different things. I was watching a PBS thing, maybe it was Smithsonian Channel, and they were talking about chocolate around the world. And they showed that, for example, in Japan, chocolate is much more sour than it is in the United States. In other places, it's much more salty. I don't like salted caramel, but I like caramel, or caramel, however you want to pronounce it. But I don't like salted caramel because I don't particularly care for the salt that's in it. Other people gobble that down. There's not one that's right and one that's wrong. We have these 5 taste buds, and we live within that matrix. And he says, so far in ethics, we have the same thing. There are 6 taste buds. And liberals favor some of those 6 taste buds, conservatives others, libertarian others. And so we all have got the same 6 moral foundations. We all have them around the world. However, we arrange those taste buds in different ways, and we actually see the world differently. I'm going to share with you my own idea, which I've done several times, and that is the 3 C's. And I think they are important. One is confirmation bias. This is one when you're reading the Bible as a pastor, excuse me, or reading anything else, I tend to read those things that confirm what I already believe. And so how many people do you know that are conservative that only watch Fox News? And how many of those that are only liberal only watch MSNBC or CNN? How many people that watch MSNBC also watch an equal amount of Fox News? And how many people that watch Fox News watch an equal amount of MSNBC? Now, those are kind of the extremes, but you get what I mean. We tend to gravitate. In Detroit, there was the Free Press, and there was the News, and for a while, the Detroit Times. Different audiences. And if you read both of those newspapers, you will get different takes on the same story. And you tend to gravitate to the one that confirms what you already believe. So that kind of what we call motivated reasoning is important. We are motivated to reason through to our own conclusion, which we've already determined. The second is being complimented. In other words, if somebody compliments us, we are much more likely to agree with them than if they are pointing fingers at us. If I were to look at Pat and say, you're wrong, whatever you say, I don't think you're right, I am attacking Pat, and already he's got defensive ideas up. So when we're yelling at one another, all we're doing is making sure that we will never understand each other, that we will just push each other away. And then the other thing is morality binds and it also blinds. And that is morality, once you get that matrix and you look at it, you say, oh, that's the way it is. But it then blinds you to any other alternative. So you think you're seeing everything, and this is true for all of us. We are all blind to other positions because the morality that we have blinds us to them. And we say to each other, I don't know how Gene understands that conspiracy theory that Trump won the election. I don't understand it. And the fact of the matter is, that is correct. Gene doesn't understand. Gene's a good friend of mine, so I can. So, but you understand what I'm saying is that we get caught up and we get blind to another one. Very rarely, if you get into a debate with somebody, say on global warming, do you sit down and say, okay, why don't we read 5 books on global warming and let us get together and let us reason together and find out about global warming? No, I'm trying to convince you that I'm right. You're trying to convince me that you're right. And it becomes a terrible game that never gets resolved. I use as an example for this, there used to be a TV program called Crossfire. And the guy, moderator, said in the middle, there was somebody on the left, somebody on the right, literally on the left and on the right. And they would take a topic and they would debate. I used to watch that fairly often. not regularly, but fairly often. Never once did I see one person on one side say, you might be right. Maybe I ought to think about that, and maybe I ought to change. Not once in debates that I've seen like that has anyone said, you're making a lot of sense because I've got to protect my position. And so I have to make sure that you know that I'm right. And we're not seeking the truth. We're seeking justification of our position.
I mean, it could be that people are practicing the principles of debate. You're supposed to try to win no matter what.
Yeah.
Marshal your arguments.
Yeah, but these are just discussions. They're not playing under those kind of rules, which I can understand. Very rarely do we not just try to justify who we are. So what I'd like to do is, I hope we've got this keyed up at the right spot. I'd like you to listen to Jonathan Haidt as he explains his understanding of what's going on with moral reasoning in the United States.
Charioteer driving two horses. So the charioteer is reason, and if reason struggles mightily, if a man learns philosophy, he can control the unruly passions, the noble passions and the base passions. So if a man studies philosophy, he can control his urges. His soul, when he dies, will return to the heavens, which are the realm of the gods. The gods are perfectly rational. If a man fails to study philosophy, fails to control his urges, then when he dies, his soul will come back to earth as a woman. Because that's so that was the view of reason and emotion that the Greeks had. Against that view, there are occasional voices in the philosophical literature that say, no, that worship of reason, that got it all wrong. And David Hume is the preeminent philosopher who said that. One of his most famous lines, reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions, and can never pretend to any other office than to serve and obey them. So reason is not the noble, mighty charioteer. Reason is a servant that does what it's told by the passions. I think a better metaphor is reason as the press secretary. This is Robert Gibbs, Obama's first press secretary. So he's a very, very smart guy. He's not just like a waiter. He's a very, very smart guy. He works for Obama. He basically does what he's told. So he goes out and you have press conferences and he gives reasons for the policies of the administration. And it just can't happen that some reporter asks a really hard question and says, well, doesn't that contradict what you said last month? It can't happen that Gibbs would then say, wow, you're right. I better go tell the president. Okay, that cannot happen. And I believe that that is a great metaphor for the relationship between reason and intuition. So to explain this, let me just read. I'll just read a few paragraphs from the book, from chapter 4. This is a section called Reasoning and Google Can Take You Wherever You Want to Go. When my son Max was 3 years old, I discovered that he's allergic to must. When I would tell him that he must get dressed so that we could go to school, he would scowl and whine. Nobody wants to be told you must do something. But if I said, can you get dressed so that we can go to school, then he'd be much happier with that. The word can is just so much nicer than the word must. So to be certain that these two words were really having opposite effects, I did a little experiment. One night after dinner, I said, in a very even, flat voice, I just said, Max, you must eat ice cream now. And he said, I don't want to. And then right away, I said, Max, you can have ice cream now if you want. I want some. Okay, that only works with a 3-year-old. 5-year-olds are too smart for that, but if you have a 3-year-old, try it. The difference between can and must is the key to understanding the profound effects of self-interest and politics on reasoning. It's also the key to understanding many of the strange beliefs that people hold in UFO abductions and such things. There's a social psychologist at Cornell named Tom Gilovich, and he gives us this very simple formulation. He says, when we want to believe something, we ask ourselves, can I believe it? Can I believe it? Do I have permission to believe it? And then what you do is you send out your press secretary, say, go, reasoning, go find me a piece of evidence to support the belief that Obama is a Muslim, or whatever it is you want to believe. Just find me a piece of evidence. And reasoning goes out, maybe it Googles it, maybe you find something. You come back, boss, here's a piece of evidence. Got it. Okay, I'm justified. I can believe it. In contrast, when we don't want to believe something, we ask ourselves, must I believe it? Must I believe it? And then you send reasoning out to look for one piece of contradictory evidence. If you find one reason to doubt, that global warming is caused by human beings, or that a fetus doesn't feel pain, whatever it is that you want to doubt, you just find one piece of evidence and you're done. You can stop thinking. Psychologists now have file cabinets full of findings on motivated reasoning, showing the many tricks people use to reach the conclusions they want to reach. When subjects are told, when they come in for an experiment and they're given a test, and then they're told that the test is an IQ test, and then they're given the option to read more about IQ tests, they read the ones with headlines so suppose you're told that you scored really well on the test. Then you choose to read the headlines that say, IQ tests are really, really valid. But if you scored low, you want to read the ones whose headlines make it clear that IQ tests are a bunch of bunk. When people read it's a fictitious scientific study that reports a link between caffeine consumption and breast cancer, so these are undergraduate students, they're taking a psychology class, they come for an experiment, they're learning about experimental methods, read this study, are the methods good? Was the sample size big enough? What are the problems with this? If you read a story about caffeine consumption correlating with breast cancer, who is going to look for problems with the study? All coffee drinkers? Women who drink coffee find a lot of problems with that study. The difference between a mind asking, must I believe it versus can I believe it, is so profound that it even influences visual perception. So in one study, subjects have to look at a screen as it's flashing up all kinds of symbols, and every time they correctly identify a number, they get a point which is worth a nickel, let's say. And so if you're getting paid to recognize numbers, what's that? Oh, but what if you're getting paid to recognize letters? What's that? Okay, so people see what they want to see. As long as there's ambiguity. Now, they're not crazy. Like, nobody says that's, if you pay people to spot an A, they're not going to say it's an A. But if there's ambiguity, and there's always ambiguity in social policy questions. If there's ambiguity, they see what they want to see. So if people can literally see what they want to see, is it any wonder that scientific studies generally fail to persuade the general public? There is no such thing as a study you must believe. It is always possible to question the methods, find an alternative interpretation of the data, or if all else fails, just question the honesty and integrity of the researchers. And now that we all have access to search engines on our cell phones, we can call up a team of supportive scientists for any conclusion we want to reach 24 hours a day. Whatever you want to believe about the causes of global warming or whether a fetus can feel pain, just Google your belief. You'll find partisan websites summarizing relevant scientific studies. Science is a smorgasbord, and Google will guide you to the study that's right for you. So that's all I'll say about that first conclusion. Intuitions come first, strategic reasoning second. And this is why we cannot persuade each other. We cannot persuade people on the other side. If you have a disagreement with people over abortion or fluoridation or anything, you cannot persuade them with reasons if their passions are engaged and if it's a team versus team situation. All right, let's move on to the next principle. There's more to morality than harm and fairness. So when I was in graduate school in the 1980s and 90s, there was a lot of research on moral psychology. It all looked at how kids develop notions of justice and fairness and also care and compassion. And that was it. But I was doing research in India. I was doing research with a wonderful anthropologist named Richard Schwader. And I learned that the moral domain is much broader and more variable outside of secular Western societies. Over time, I developed a theory with my colleagues as to what the taste buds of the moral sense are. What are the just as our tongues have special receptors for sweet and sour because our ancestors evolved to eat fruit. And we have receptors for glutamate and bitter and salt. We were evolved to eat meat. So our tongues guide us to what's good for us. Our minds have the equivalent of taste buds that make us notice social patterns that it was adaptive to notice. So the first taste bud, if you will, is care and harm, nurturance, protection, things like that, because we're mammals. And that means that we're successful in rearing our young when we're really sensitive to issues of care, harm, vulnerability, need, things like that. So absolutely, this is innate. You could not argue otherwise. You could not argue that we learn compassion entirely from our society, that we're not born with a predisposition for it. Second foundation is issues of fairness and cheating. But here, the key to fairness is understanding it as proportionality. We're really good at keeping track of who's done what, who's cheating, who's slacking, who's taking more than their fair share. We're really sensitive. We really hate free riders and slackers. Now, what you'll see emerging is that on all of these, there's a bit of a partisan split. So on this one, everybody has this, but liberal morality, liberal politics rests more firmly on this foundation than does conservative. On this one, everybody thinks that they value fairness, but as you'll see, there's two different kinds of fairness. Liberty and oppression, all Americans value liberty. We'll get back to that. Loyalty and betrayal. So some animals can work in groups, but they tend to be very small groups, structured by kin. Only humans can create very large groups that are not brothers and sisters, they're not family. We are prepared for war. Our minds are prepared for war. And they're so prepared for war that we invented sports, because when we can't get enough war, so we need something to occupy our war circuit, so we invented football. And then we love it so much that we invented super fandom, because we love rooting for our side in pretend war. Fifth foundation is authority and subversion. Here are displays of respect, or deference, I should say, in two very closely related species. Not that they're the same, but the ethology, the behavior is similar. And the last foundation is issues of sanctity or degradation, which you find very well developed on the religious right and in most religions. This is a medieval painting called the Allegory of Chastity. It shows the Virgin Mary in a basically a rock chastity belt with pure water flowing from a stream that comes from beneath her legs, guarded by not just lions, mind you, but lions with the gold shields around their necks. So the allegorical symbolism, purity, is very, very intense. And this image of female sexuality is much, much more common on the right among social conservatives, conservatives of many religions. Here's an image more popular on the left. This is from Madonna's book, Sex, because female sexuality should be expressed, not hidden away. Here's a bumper sticker, a photo I took in Charlottesville. Your body may be a temple, but mine's an amusement park. So again, this is a big part of our culture wars, different attitudes about sexuality, purity, sanctity, all that sort of stuff. So I do research. I have a website with my colleagues at yourmorals.org. You can go there and take our surveys. You can get your moral profile. This is a graph that summarizes the results. This is 3,700 people, but we've got data from 300,000 overall. So this shows how people score on those 6 foundations I just showed you. People who, when you go to the site, you register. So people say they're very liberal, give very high endorsement to the CARE Foundation. That's their top foundation. That's the one they most value. As people get more conservative, it goes down. So it's not that conservatives don't care. It's not that they think it's okay to hurt animals or insult people, but their morality is just not focused primarily on care. Fairness. Now, this is fairness as proportionality. If you have items about equality, then it goes the opposite way. So my point is just that actually everybody cares about fairness and care, but there are different rankings. This is liberty. Now, this is economic liberty. If I'd put in lifestyle liberty, which suggested gay rights, then the tilt reverses. So don't worry about the tilt there. Both value both. But the point is, care is preeminent here, not here. This is really what the culture war is about, though. The culture war historically was about the fact that the left devalued those 3. They just didn't think that was part of morality. Whereas on the right, all 6 are actually roughly equally important. So that's the social conservative morality in particular. That's the liberal morality. To illustrate this graphically, this is what the culture war used to be before the Tea Party. From the 90s through the early 2000s, this is what the culture war was about. I just Googled family, and I deliberately picked a white family with 2 daughters. Daughters are more vulnerable. Daughters elicit more desires to protect. And so imagine a white family in the 1990s, a white Christian family in the 1990s trying to raise its daughters. And this is a distortion of reality, but it's not a fabrication. The way the right portrayed the left, here are some of the issues. Here again, sexuality. This is from Madonna's book, Sex. Sex is good. Have sex in every combination you can think of. If you want to slit your tongue, that's a form of self-expression. Pierce everything on your body, that's fine. Move to Portland if your family doesn't like it. If you want to take drugs, that's your choice. If you want to burn the American flag, hey, that's great, because dissent is the highest form of patriotism. If you want an abortion, that's your choice. It's not killing, it's just a choice. If you want to end your life, call Jack Kevorkian. And this is the baby Jesus butt plug. Because if you're on the cultural left, especially the far left, subversion is good. What's the highest praise for a work of art? That it's subversive. So if you can take the icon, if you can take a symbol of what those terrible, awful, nasty religious conservatives value, namely Jesus Christ, and stick it in your anus, that's an act of political defiance. All right, so these are, while of course these are exaggerations of what people on the left believed, but they're not made up out of nothing. So this was the argument that the right was able to make to America about the left, which was pretty compelling. And the right, the Republicans dominated from Reagan through sometime into the 90s. The Republicans dominated the political landscape with this kind of argument. Since the Tea Party and the recession, things have changed. The culture war issues, because the Tea Party was social conservatives plus libertarians, they had to tone down that old culture war stuff. They've now shifted more to debates over fairness and liberty. So this is a section from Obama's second inaugural address where he really pivots and really starts to articulate a liberal approach to fairness and liberty. We are true to our creed when a little girl born into the bleakest poverty knows that she has the same chance to succeed as anybody else. Let me note that Obama had one terrible line in 2008 that he was crucified for. Remember what it was? Spread the wealth. I think it's good when you spread the wealth. Now that is what the left has often believed. Obama has been very careful since that day not to say that. He never talks about equality of outcome. He talks about equality of opportunity, which is a big winner in America. So notions of fairness as equality of opportunity, and then positive liberty, the freedom that so the notion of positive liberty is the state has to help you get basic requirements that you can have liberty, you can have choices. So this was what Obama, since his Osawatomie speech in Kansas, he's been developing notions of positive liberty and fairness that are really the new culture war. That's what the left and right were arguing about in the last election. He talks about social entitlement programs not as a safety net to spread the wealth, but he says these things, Medicare, Social Security, they do not sap our initiative, they strengthen us. They do not make us a nation of takers, they free us to take the risks that make this country great. So he's articulating a vision. So this is a map I drew for an article I published recently, showing, I think, the new landscape, the new culture war. So both sides claim that they stand for fairness. Both sides stand for liberty. Everybody does. But they're different kinds. So positive liberty, where the government supports you so that you have liberty, that's owned by the Democrats. Whereas negative liberty, the don't tread on me, don't tell me what to do, don't regulate me, that's owned by the Republicans. On fairness, equality, especially equality of outcomes, is totally owned by the Democrats. Proportionality is actually owned by the Republicans. Do the crime, do the time. 3 strikes and you're out. Republicans much more strongly value punishment for misdeeds. Now, of course, there are exceptions. They're fine with letting Wall Street off. But the Tea Party was not actually. The Tea Party, the real social conservatives, they were really upset about the bailouts and things like that. So it's a little complicated. The point is that the old culture war over sex and patriotism is sort of is quieting down, and this, I think, is the new culture war. All right. So what I'm saying is that there are real issues at stake, and those issues have changed from 10 or 20 years ago. Last point, and this one is brief. Morality binds and blinds. So large-scale cooperation is very rare in nature. There are very few species that can work together in large groups. The ones that can do it are pretty much all siblings. So ants, bees, wasps, termites. This is a termite mound in Australia, 20 feet high. But they do it because they're all siblings. There's one queen who lays all the eggs. The individuals are sterile. So they're essentially a superorganism. And that's the way that nature has found to produce cooperation. There's only one exception to that rule, and that is us. Human beings have been cooperating for hundreds of thousands of years. As hunter-gatherers can work together, but still in pretty small groups. And then once we develop agriculture, bang, a couple thousand years later we get cities. What you'll notice about the cities, though, is that whenever you get civilization and cities, you always have temples. So that's Babylon on the left, Tenochtitlan on the right. You always have temples. Religion played a crucial role in the origin of civilization. When people, in order to get together, if they make something sacred, an ancestor or a tree or a rock or a river, if they worship it, if they bow down together, if they circle it together, then they trust each other. This is part of our psychology. Morality binds us together, but then it blinds us to anything that contradicts that sacralization. We find it very natural to circle around sacred objects. These are Muslims circling around a rock in Mecca. The rock is inside that box there, but there's a boulder in there. And when we circle around, it's as though you're running a wire through a magnetic field and it's an electric current. So metaphors of electricity polarized. Electricity has two poles. Very well. It's a metaphor of physics. It works very well for our personal lives. I think we evolved this psychology of religion to bind us together around gods, but we could do it around flags. So patriotism, nationalism are based on the same underlying psychology of groupishness, of group binding. If you treat your country as sacred, and somebody comes along and says that America committed war crimes, which John Kerry said when he came back from Vietnam, and of course he was right. Of course he was right. You always commit war crimes during a war. But if you sacralize America, you can't say that because that's treason. So morality binds and blinds you to reality. So when we do this, it pulls apart positive and negative. We are perfectly good, and the other side is perfectly evil. We have this very profound tendency towards Manichaeism. Manichaeus was a prophet in Persia or northwest Persia, the Kurdistan area, the 3rd century, I think it was, who preached that the world is a battleground between the forces of light and darkness, and each of us has to decide which side we're on. This way of thinking, of dividing the world into good and evil, is so natural to us. Whenever there's a fight, you find people demonizing the other side. They're just images from the internet. But of course, just think about the way the people on the left think about Sarah Palin, or people on the right think about Pelosi or Obama. Or Ann Coulter on the upper right. So we have this ancient psychology of, well, what do you do with a heretic or a traitor? You don't just fine them. You don't put them in jail. You have to kill them. You can sometimes banish them, but the natural thing to do, what feels right, is to burn them to death. As happened recently to Governor Christie. Can you imagine? I mean, there's a major hurricane, a storm destroying millions of people are affected. You'd think that the leader of the state and the leader of the nation should work together, but the fact that they do is a crime to many people on the right when Christie did that. So that's the basic psychology I want to present to you. Intuitions come first. We are intuitive creatures. That's why we can't reason each other out of this. We can't reason our way across the divide. The divide is real, and it's over really substantive issues that we do need to talk about as a nation. What is fair? What is the role of government? These are important issues. It's not that one side is completely right or wrong. We disagree on that, and that should be okay. Democracy is not about agreement. Democracy is a way of living together and doing something when you don't agree. So our democracy should be able to handle this, but it can't. Part of the reason it can't is that we are tribal creatures, and our tribalism has gotten much, much worse since the 90s. In Congress, especially, but also among the people. And that's where we are. So what can you do personally? What can you specifically do tonight or tomorrow? First, I urge you all to join No Labels. Raise your hand if you're already a member. Anybody? Okay, a few of you. Good. I think it's a great organization. I don't know if anybody, I should have checked that, whether the Oregon Congress people are members of the Problem Solvers. Can anybody look that up, or does anybody know? Maybe look it up after. Well, whatever. I don't know. Look it up. Well, join No Labels. Give them some money, and support them. Common Cause, I think, is also a great group. Money is such a problem. Money in politics is such a problem. No Labels isn't touching that, but Common Cause is. We desperately need campaign finance reform. The third thing, and now this is where we shift to what we can do in our own lives. The basic lesson that I take away from moral psychology is moral humility. Once you realize what weird creatures we are psychologically and how biased and distorted our reasoning is, of course, we don't realize that about ourselves. But don't you think that about people on the other side? I mean, it's so obvious about that. And actually, I need to check. Raise your hand. So are you guys on the left or the right? Raise your hand if you'd say you're on the left or you're a liberal. Please raise your hand high if you're on the left or liberal. Okay, clear majority, strong majority. Raise your hand if you're on the right or conservative. Okay, that's actually a fair number, probably about 10% of you, 5 or 10%, which is, I never find that many in an academic audience, never, ever. And it's a lot more here than in Eugene, which was even more liberal. So it's easy to see all these things operating on the other side. But once you understand moral psychology, and if you read my book, you read the early chapters, I think you have to come to this conclusion. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but you do not see the log in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. This is one of the ancient truths that we're
Okay, that's just kind of an overview of where he is. And I'd like to just kind of ask you if you've got one of these sheets that I handed out, you'll find in the back 3 charts. One is the liberal moral matrix, the other one is the libertarian moral matrix, and the other one is the social conservative moral matrix. And we all have all of those 6 things, ideas in our lives. And in his book, for example, he shows clubbing a baby seal. I see that and I get just absolutely, how can you do that? But obviously, if you need it to live, and some people don't see that as being a problem at all. He talks about, for example, freedom and compassion is, on the left is the save for, help the poor, help the disenfranchised. On the right, that same compassion is helping the, what's the one that helps the military veterans who come back wounded? Wounded warrior. Wounded warrior just resonates with people. The more conservative you are, that's real compassion. And what's it compassion about? It's compassion about us. Which is not bad. We have to understand that none of this is necessarily bad. It's compassion about us, what we do. Liberals tend to be more compassionate about the down and the out, the people who are suffering in Darfur, the people who are suffering in the inner cities, people who suffer in racial prejudice. Their sense of of this is outward looking, not entirely. You have to be careful, but in large measure it is. Now, when it comes to fairness, liberals will say, for example, marching for the meek and the weary. This is a sign he has in his book. Tax the wealthy fair and square. The wealthy ought to be paying more to help the poor. That's just so obvious. I don't understand why you don't think that at all. That's the way a liberal would be, and that's the way, especially very liberal. Tax the rich so that we can distribute the wealth in a more equitable manner. And then another sign right next to it at a Tea Party rally is, spread my work ethic, not my wealth. Same principle, but looking at it from a different perspective. And so conservatives tend to also want fairness, but their understanding of fairness is not a fairness of outcome, but a fairness at the beginning. And so how dare you, as one sign said, what have you given to our society? And they would say, well, if you're making $100 million a year or $30 million a year, maybe you've given that much to society that you earn it. And if you've earned it, how dare anyone else tax it to a greater extent than you would someone else? And people here are saying, spread my work ethic, not my wealth. They don't understand. They literally do not understand when someone says, we ought to be taxing the wealthy by 45%. They can afford it, and we're going to distribute it down here to the poor and so on and so forth. So they have that, but it's different. Another one is a sign on the back of a car that says, "Oh, glory," and an American flag. right? Another one has Stop Americanism. Both of them are talking about loyalty. But where does your loyalty lie? What size of group is your loyalty situated in? And when we stop and look, for example, I've gotten in trouble at the Congregational Church more than one time. And can anyone guess what I got in trouble for more than anything else? Moving the American flag in the sanctuary. When I got here, I looked at the flags and I thought, oh, that's not the way they're supposed to be. And I rearranged them. The next board meeting, I got hit with people saying, how dare you move the American flag? Now, what's that got to do with worship? But if that flag is sacred, the Marines putting it up, it's not wrong for you to love your country. But if that is sacred, I've gotten in more trouble moving the flag than anything else I've ever done in the church. Well, I tried that once, and that does not work at all. That does not. I even got in trouble once when I was here the first time because, and I don't know who did it, someone turned the American eagle on the flag so it was pointing the opposite direction it was. But if you served in the Second World War, if you were in the Battle of Normandy, if you were on the top of Mount Shirabachi, if you were, if that flag becomes for you one of the things in which you organize your life around, then look at what we had when football players knelt to the flag, right? I mean, the flag, and it's a gut instinct. I was talking to someone that I know very well, and he was saying, well, I'm never going to watch an NFL football game again. Don't watch it. But he said, how dare them do that? And I said, look, they're kneeling. That's a sign of respect. They're kneeling to say, they're not raising their fist. They're not flipping the bird off or anything else. They're kneeling. Well, you can't do that to the flag. And I said, well, in America, we have the right to protest, right? Oh, yes, we have the right, but not to the flag. I mean, there was nothing I could say that would change the mind because the flag was the sacred symbol around which he organized a lot of his life. And somebody who is not organized around that symbol can say, well, of course, you can protest using the American flag. So, for example, he says, if you go to the Wall Street rallies, flags were there with things marked on them. And it was, he said he was astounded because all these flags had, share the wealth and all that on them. He went to a Tea Party rally, and there was a thing written on any of the flags. And everybody was parading around with flags and flag shirts and flag hats. Flag was, so if you attack that flag, you're right down in the nitty gritty. I've often thought it interesting that since Trump was here, people flying flags that have Trump written over it have changed their central figure from the flag and America to Trump. Trump now is much more important to them than even the United States is, because they can change the American flag, not because the American flag no longer represents who they are. They have changed the symbol. They've changed the symbol to one that has Trump on it, and that one now has become sacred, more sacred anyway than the American flag. Just I want to say that we all organize ourselves around some form of reality.
Is that a popular thing? A lot of people are the flag.
Oh, have you ever been across? I live over by the 19th hole. back in, well, actually it's closer to the corner depot, but in that area. For the last 2 years, I haven't seen it this year, right at the corner across from the 19th hole. They have any of you seen that? They have, that whole area is nothing but Trump flags and don't tread on me flags and flags with that have been, if the left had done it, would have been considered desecrated because they have marked out different colors and they have, I see. And if you look at January 6th, what were the most prominent flags that were on January 6th?
There was one flag, it said Trump and Christ underneath.
Right, yeah, that things had moved so that it is not seen to a certain, not to everyone, to a certain far right. You can write Trump across the flag. If someone on the left wrote Obama across the flag, what do you think the reaction would be? Right, and we're talking about gut reaction. We're not talking about reasons. We're talking about these are things that, and I understand it. If my father fought in the Second World War, the idea of the flag for him was, I mean, they died under that flag, right? They fought under that flag. And also what he will say is that the Second World War brought us together because how does a Republican or a Democrat hate the other when the other was also on the beaches of Normandy? And so people, they say in that great generation age, were much more cooperative in Congress. It was Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan time. They both remember the Second World War. They both had a common enemy. They both fought in their own way for America. And so they could sit down, they could battle all day long and then afterwards sit down and have, as he said, have a bourbon. I like bourbon, that's a good one.
But Vietnam didn't work that way.
But that's right. He says, if you were born after that, during Vietnam, the war divided the country. And so you ended up having to take different sides. And so the other people were not patriotic. So also the what's your nation? Insubordination, with the nation cut out at the end. Guess who would have that? And who would have this one? God's in charge, so shut up. I mean, that's a different way of looking at the world. There's a flag here. He shows a picture of it that has all different religious symbols where the stars used to be. Okay. So it has the crescent, the cross, the Star of David, the Buddha, and so every star is replaced by a different symbol for a religion. Left or right? Left or right? I mean, okay. How about this as a bumper sticker? You voted for it, comrade. Okay, who did that? And what he's trying to say is that we all have those 6 flavors, and if you've got my paper that I handed out, those are care, liberty, fairness, loyalty, authority, and sanctity. And he says the conservatives will almost always win out in advertising. And if you look at the chart I had in the back, you will see that almost all advertising for the liberal group of people in the country will almost always emphasize what? Caring, right? Why aren't we caring? And they will also be seeking things like freedom for the LGBTQ, those sorts of things. And they will understand liberty in the sense of trying to free people so that they have more freedom. Now, if you're a libertarian, he said these are not right or wrong, these are just who you are internally. Liberty is more important than anything else. In other words, I don't care if that dang vaccine will stop the COVID. You can't make me do it. And if you come from that more libertarian thing, what is your main value? Your main value is liberty, more than caring. It doesn't mean that you don't care for your wife and your husband and your dog and your kids. It doesn't mean that. But if your initial gut reaction is to say, you can't take my liberty from me, and so you see those flags, don't tread on me. And so individual liberty is the sacred point around which everything revolves. And so you can't make me wear a mask, you can't make me take the vaccine, you can't make me do this or that, whatever it is. And for a libertarian, their social values are all to be understood in terms of that one thing. And so people who are from the left or the right look at that and say, but if you look at the one on the social conservative moral matrix, what he found out was that all of these are represented in equal manner. And so when a liberal starts talking in an ad about compassion, if he also doesn't hit authority, sanctity, and loyalty, then it's not going to speak to somebody who's more conservative, because they need to have those bells rung also. And so I'm not going to convince you just to feel sorry for someone or some group, or that you ought to take care of someone, unless I can also maintain your liberty, talk about fairness so that you feel like you're being treated fairly, and talking about loyalty and respect for authority. And if you don't ring all of those bells sometime during your campaign, you're not going to speak to people who are more conservative, because they've got all of those bells on an equal footing with their with their way they look at the world. And so, and what he will say is, it isn't that one's right and one's wrong. This is not that kind of a game. It's how do we talk to one another, and how do we become yin and yang and come back together. Now, a couple of things I want to share with you, and then we'll have time for discussion. He said there are a few things that we need to do. He has this one chart that he had statisticians grow, and it's a whole bunch of blue and red dots, and they're all kind of mixed together, and then all of a sudden they spread apart, so they're in two camps. And he said a couple of things have happened. One starts with Newt Gingrich. And he says it's not because he's a Republican, and it's not because he's a conservative, but he changed the whole structure of Washington, D.C. I didn't realize. One thing he did was, it used to be that the chairs of Senate and House committees went to the senior member of the party who was on that committee. So I would be chair of the committee because I got gray hair and I'm old. Okay. You have experience. So the chair automatically went to the next person in line by seniority. He said what Gingrich did is he stopped that, and only he could appoint people to chair. So now you had to be pure in order to be chair. You wouldn't, if you had kind of a mixed bag, you weren't going to be there. You had to kind of pass Gingrich's test. Now, by the way, this could be any politician. You had to pass the test of purity in order to run that committee. The other thing he did was ask that the calendar, now these are things you don't think about, that the calendar of Congress be changed. Okay? It used to be you worked 5 days for 3 weeks. Okay, 5 days. Then you had a week off and you could fly back home. Gingrich changed so you worked 3 days and then you had the next 5 days, 3 days, next 4 days off. And he worked to have the representatives not live in Washington, but to keep their wives and families back home. And what happened is, whereas friendships between families had developed, so that there was interaction between not just the representatives, but there was interaction with the children, the families, playing on a softball team together, doing those sorts of common interactions. Now, what he wanted was everybody to go home on weekends, for the families to live outside of Washington. And then in Washington, you would bunk or share rooms or apartments with people who thought like you did. And so you began to remove human contact. And he said, and this is something I didn't know, and I don't know, I take it as true because I'm not going to go find out myself, is that underground there are now trains that move you from Capitol building to Capitol building, one for Republicans, one for Democrats. And so one of the things that has happened is that we have lessened human contact and human interaction, and we have become purists. What's the worst thing you can say to a Republican, according to Trump? You're a rhino. He has this wonderful chart that shows that up until about late 80s, there were both 90% of Republicans, the Republican Party that I belong to, the Republican Party that my family belonged to, were basically moderates. And super conservatives were very small. And there were Republicans who were liberals. Okay? They were liberals. They used to call them what, Rockefeller Republicans. Maybe not a lot, but they were still Republicans. And the same was true with Democrats, is that they were basically moderate. And some of them were even conservatives. They were called what, Dixiecrats, which meant you had to have within your own party was not pure, and you had to have debate, and you had to bring your own party along, which meant you had to bring elements along that were different than maybe what everyone thought, because both parties had a range of liberal to conservative. The Republicans had more conservatives, the Democrats had more liberals, but they both had a significant measure of people who could not easily be categorized to always be on one side or another. Now, do any of you remember the Hastur rule? That Hastur was also Speaker of the House, and he had a saying: if you can't pass it with all Republican votes, then don't take it. You see what that does? That means I have to have 100% of my people, I have to have a pure party, because I have to pass it with nothing, not depending on a single vote from the other party. And so what has happened is the purification of our parties, both parties. Both parties, radical right and radical left, have become larger. And both of them, what do you hear about cinema and magic? No, why? Because they don't vote 100% down the line. People who are Democrat complain all those Republicans have to all lockstep, and then you got two on their side that aren't lockstep, and all of a sudden they're anathema. So you have to pull them in, and they're talking about primary manship, just like the Republicans threatened to primary. The other thing he says we have to do is get rid of primaries as a now constitute. Because they now simply demand purity.
Can the Speaker of the House make these changes just because he
Well,
wants?
he'll get his people to vote along.
But he has to have a vote.
Well, for some he can change. I mean, I think he can set the calendar, or she can set the calendar. But they said the problem is now what do Republicans fear most? Being primary, right? Because who votes in primaries for the Democrats and the Republicans? The people who are far right and the people who are far left. Basically determine who's going to run. And so remember that just recently, 2 weeks ago, I forget his name, the Republican said he was open to vote for gun control. Some minor, not major, but he was open to think of gun control. A week later, he resigned. He's not going to run because he could never pass his primary. The primary determines the purity of the party. And so when you have closed primaries, unless all Republicans voted in the primary, which would be the other way you could do that, but look at who votes in the primaries. Who votes in the primaries? Basically loyalists, right? And so he says we're purifying both parties so that there is a growing larger and larger gap and an inability to speak to somebody with a different view, because now we are demonizing them. I'm glad my mother and father are deceased, because one of the worst things you could do in my household was to denigrate somebody by calling them a name. If I called somebody stupid or ignorant or something like that, my mother would be down on me faster than I could. But now I sometimes throw up my hands with all the name calling that's going around.
I saw something, I think it was a PBS, where Newt Gingrich was actually had training sessions to teach these people, Republicans, to be nastier. And say, well, my network's not strong enough to replace it with something else.
Right.
They're actually teaching people in training sessions to be nastier.
And that's what he says. This is what happens. Now, if we respond first with our gut, and we purify both parties, he says that the genius of the American system, he uses an example, not in the book, but somewhere else. He uses the example of the Big Bang, which may sound crazy, but he says the Big Bang, we know now that any of those constant factors, if they were changed by as much sometimes as 0.1%, the universe would not have come about as it does. Any one of those constants had to be absolutely perfect. And he says that that's like our founders. They created a perfectly balanced system, and if one of them goes wrong, then the whole thing falls apart. It is the House is supposed to stand up to the president, right? I mean, that's it. Our whole government is based on the fact that we're all sinners, that we all are fallible, and you have to have what? Checks and balances. Checks and balances do what? They give us equilibrium. It's like image I use is when I lived over closer to the lake and we planted a tree, we had wires going in all directions. so that that tree would go strong. If we took the wires, the wind was coming in, it would end up literally not growing straight. And so he says, it's not that we should all agree, because we shouldn't. It's that we all should counterbalance one another. You see, the thing about the Republican and Democratic Party is they had both liberals and conservatives in them, and then they had to deal with each other, and all of that kind of messiness was a counterbalance. And if you take that counterbalance out, and so I am just amazed. I'm sorry, I'm just amazed. Richard Nixon, for all his faults, they wanted the tapes, he turned the tapes over. I always wondered, why did he do that? I mean, but he did. Al Gore, when he could have gone on, back down from the election. Richard Nixon, when he lost the election to John F. Kennedy, and probably actually won that election because of some fiddling going around in Chicago, Nixon said, for the good of the country. Up until recently, every time the Congress subpoenaed somebody to come in, they came in from the administration because their job was oversight, that counterbalance. And those are all not legal things so much as they are, these are the things, the way we do them as Americans. And now, I don't want to testify to Congress, so, I'm not going to. And then what do you have to do? Well, okay, we're going to subpoena it. I'm not going to do the subpoena. Okay, you're not going to subpoena. Well, we're going to take you to court. 2 years later, we're going to take you to the appellate court. 3 years later, we're going to go to the Supreme Court. Oh, we won. Who cares? I know it's maybe a little exaggerated, but you know what I mean, is that you just simply stall and stall and stall and stall. And our government, he says, cannot work. By the way, he started out a liberal and he's now a conservative. I mean, he's more balanced. He says he's a moderate conservative. He's changed his position. But he says he's changed his position because he had to come in contact with people who thought differently. And he actually had to sit down and deal with them. So that's kind of the overview of where he is. And he really is kind of not very hopeful in the short term, because we have become so demonizing the other. One of the things I couldn't believe, I grew up in an all-Republican household in Detroit. One of the few union members my dad was probably that was a Republican. I grew up most of my life as I was told whoever gets elected is my president. I've lost lots of elections, right? And as I moved away from the Republican Party, and I am now an independent, person gets elected, he's my president, she's my president. And what's happened in the last 4 years? Who's our president? I can't even get my member of the House of Representatives, because I've texted and called Representative Bergman 4 or 5 times, and he will not admit that Joseph Biden is president of the United States. How do we function with hideous law? I'm sorry. That's just wrong. And you see, I get a little bit upset when we just can't do the basic things that we have to do for government. If you don't believe Biden is president of the United States, how do you function? I'm sorry. I'll back off.
Do you see any way out of this?
What he says is we have to stop 2 things. We have to stop demonizing the other person. We have to start listening to one another, and understanding that if we are a liberal, there are these other things over here that we have to address if we want to speak to people who are. We have to broaden our base. We have to understand what is our sense of authority, what is our sense of purity, what is our sense of, and we have to speak to that. We can't, and conservatives need to understand that people on the liberal side weight their 6 values differently. And that because of that, they literally see the world different. And so we need to reestablish constructive conflict.
So there's not one right or one wrong.
Right, he says, if you only know your own position, you know nothing. Because the only way you know who you are is by talking to somebody who is different, who challenges that position, so you can see out where your weakness is in your own. When I was teaching ethics, I had everyone in class pick a subject. They could pick anything they wanted. And then I would say one part of it was that they had to present the opposing side best arguments that they could find. And that was the hardest section of the paper for every one of them to deal with. Because they would bring the paper in and I'd say, are these the best arguments? And they would say, well, those are the ones you found because those are the ones you were looking for. Go back and look for stronger arguments because there were stronger arguments that opposed their position. And that was both sides, by the way. Yeah.
What bothers me, Bob, is, I shouldn't say Bob,
Body's fine. That's all I go by.
One political party has restrictions, things are, going that way, that's their decisions on. And then another party takes over and automatically cancels out all that person's rules that they have put in place. They're not rules or laws. And then the whole thing turns upside down.
Yeah,
here we are today.
Yeah, he said that there's a difference. He said John Wayne, very conservative, right, was asked about John F. Kennedy when John Kennedy was elected president. He said, I don't agree with him on anything. I'm paraphrasing, but this is pretty close to what he said. I don't agree with him on anything, but I wish him well for the good of the country. Okay? I don't agree with him, but I wish him well for the good of the country. Remember what happened when they asked that question of McConnell? We're going to make sure he's a one-term president and that he doesn't succeed. Okay, how are you going to govern? That's an attitude thing. It's an attitude thing. How, when didn't we all wish whoever was president that they would succeed? I mean, if they succeed, then we all succeed, right? I mean, that's, and as an American, like my folks said, now beat into me. Whoever's elected president is your president, period.
United we stand, divided we fall.
That's it, president. How many times have I heard, he's not my president? Well, if he's not your president, then we're in different countries. We're in different countries. And this, I'm sorry, but this insanity has to stop if our country is going to survive. I know that's awful strong, but so anyways, I like his idea of can and must. That if you must believe something and you don't want to, and this is with conspiracy theories all over. The one that he gives is somebody was saying that he wanted to believe that Obama was born in Kenya. Went online and found that 10,000 people online thought that he was born in Kenya. Okay, He must have been born in Kenya, right? Right? I mean, that's confirmation bias. That's you look and you find what you're looking for. And I tell you, as a pastor and as just an American, confirmation bias is with us all. All of us have confirmation. One of the things, Gene, when we read the scripture, we have to do is make sure we're not reading into the scripture what we want the scripture to say. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of training to know what you can use and what you can't use and how you can use it, because it just happens.
Before the media has gotten so strong in our country, and with the knowledge that we can get immediately, we really were, not a lot of us were, we really didn't know what was going on in Washington.
Well, yeah, and there were three things that he says also about that is that when I was growing up, there were two major stations, then there were three. So you got your news from Huntley Brinkley, Walter Cronkite, who was the other one? And then later on, Tom Brokaw, and we all got the news from the same source. And it wasn't continuing, but we all got the news from the same source. Now I determine what news I'm going to listen to. You know, and if all I do is listen to Fox News, or if all I do is listen to MSNBC, I'm being brainwashed every day.
How do you determine what you're going to watch? Because
I don't watch any of
you
them.
listen to BBC, they don't report.
Yes, they do. They do a pretty good job, I think, particularly some of the morning shows.
I think that you mentioned public regulation, back then, they reported news. Now everyone's a journalist, which is disconnected.
I agree with you.
The news.
I agree with you. That people don't understand that MSNBC and Fox News will say that they're there for entertainment. Yeah, they will say that. And what I do is I read the Washington Post, the Detroit Free Press, and Time Magazine. Where I get most of mine.
I find that CBS and NBC.
They do pretty good.
I watch those more than CNN and MSNBC. They're a little bit too slanted, and Fox is extremely slanted in my opinion. But the original NBC, CBS, and ABC seem to be more fair, presenting both sides of issues. Seems to me anyway.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I do. When I do watch CBS News, I feel I get a very balanced. And I get 4 or 5 news stories. There's other channels also get a hold of one news story, and you know, who wants to listen to the same story told for 10 hours? I mean, it just it gets old. So one of the things he says is we have to be careful how we have to keep checking ourselves and realizing that all of us, myself included, tend to want to read things that confirm my own position. This book, there's so much in it I haven't even been able to touch on. And I really wish everyone could read it. The other thing is, not only do I look for things that will allow me to believe it, but I will look for things that allows me not to. And one of the things he says is the like button on Facebook. And I don't know what are the other ones, Twitter and give me some of that.
Instagram.
They say, yeah, I'm not on those. My kids are, but I'm not. What happens is you're leaning one way. Pick a subject, any subject. That global warming is not caused by human beings. So a Twitter comes, you've only got so many letters. And so you state your conclusion without necessarily any reasons. And someone says, oh, yeah, that's right. That's what I agree. And they hit the share button. And all of a sudden it goes out to 100 different people. And they look at it and they say, oh, yeah. And they hit that button and it goes out to another 100 people. And yes, and then you get the thing is, look, 100,000 people like the fact that we human beings have nothing to do with how much research was done. Well, none. I mean, we're not good at research. How many of us seriously research, not just go online and put something in and say, I want to, tell me about global warming. How many of us actually do any real research? Probably close to zero.
Facebook and almost social media companies will feed you more and more of the things that you like.
Right.
So you only see less and less. Yeah.
And then you begin to, and if you look, I listen to Tucker Carlson once in a while because I feel I need to. Well, if you listen to him enough, it's scary. His anger, his vitriol is just, and I suppose it could be for other people, but I watch him every once in a while because I just feel I need to see what's being said.
But I think that as personally as Joe Blow, look where our country is. And everybody is concerned about inflation, about gas prices, the things that have caused it. I mean, we're not just sitting around like a bunch of idiots and nothing is happening to change it.
No.
Nothing is happening to change the situation at the board.
Yeah, and how many people are blaming Biden for the oil price? Okay, the president has almost nothing to do with oil price.
Well, he did because he changed the law that he shut down the hate pipeline.
Yeah, but what's really happening is the war in the Ukraine.
If you look at the United States government,
See what we're doing.
if you look at, you'll find the week after began to rise, they already were going out of rocket before Putin invaded Ukraine. It's propaganda. It's propaganda when the news media says, well, since because Putin invaded Ukraine, prices are up. We're already up considerably by then. If you look at the data, we're watching
I don't, by the way. So, well, I will say, well, because I watched some of that, like I watched some of Fox. I watched some of both of them.
But I mean,
But see, what we're doing is exactly what he says.
right. And I think it's facts.
Well,
when you listen to journalists, the reason they want to be journalists in all these stations, not in all those stations, because they can play loose, they give you their opinion. It's not really factual. And that's why Walter Cronkite never made it nowadays. He's stuck with facts.
What I'm saying is we also choose what facts we want to look at.
But we're talking oil prices. We're looking at the
I'm just saying that what we're doing is what there needs to be more. I don't need you to agree with me. I need you to disagree with me, but not be disagreeable in your disagreement.
Well said.
And so I'm trying to practice what I was just talking about. We have to be honest with one another and realize that we all come at this from a different perspective. All of us want a different outcome.
Oh, what good do you think President Biden has done to help us with the border situation when he hasn't even been down there? And he's not stopping the illegals from coming into our country.
But see, okay, I think that's wonderful. I think that is both of you hit on something I think is very important. A liberal looks at the border situation and says, those are all poor people fleeing from Venezuela and Mexico. Come on in. I mean, that's the initial gut reaction of a liberal, is to say they're escaping abuse and dictatorial things, and they're doing what all Americans ought to do and what did at one time. They're coming, like my grandfather did, they're coming to this country to get away from something in the country where they were raised.
And I, as a conservative, look at it as our own people in this country are not being taken care of, but we're trying to take care of everything else.
Yeah, well, but I understand that. Well, that was my next statement. Other people will look at that and say, we can't handle all of that. What about the people who are here? All I'm saying is that is exactly what is happening, and we've got to learn to talk to one another. And he says, I have to say I'm a liberal, and I think on social issues, I have to say, yeah. Okay, so what do we do? How do we work together? How do we make a sensible? I can't just say, well, let them all in. And you can't just say, well, build a wall and keep them all out. We could, but that's going to get us nowhere. I have to say, okay, that's interesting about the oil prices. What could he have done? Let's see if we can work together. I'll give you an example. I was working with, that gets me in trouble. I am moderately pro-choice. Okay, moderate. I want to say that would take me a while to explain what I mean by that. But I'm not just everyone just have an abortion. I was dealing with a very prominent Roman Catholic in Alpena. This is maybe 20 years ago. Very prominent. And we were friends, okay? So we sat down over a beer one day at the 19th hole, and we said, both of us want abortions to slow down, right? And have as few as possible. Let's work together. He said, I can't.
I can't either.
I said, why? We're both working for the same end. We're both together. We can cut down the number of abortions. We might even be able to come close to eliminating, but we've got to work together. He said, well, my church won't let me. So abortions continue to rise, and we didn't work together. We have to realize that the other person is not a demon. The other person is not evil. The other person is coming at it with maybe a different, those six values, we all have them. We all have them. But one comes with an emphasis on one set of values, another on this one. So how can we, as I honor your set of values and you honor my set of values, how do we come together in a pluralistic society with solutions that don't simply say it's all Biden's fault? I say, okay, I'm willing to listen to you. I find what you say very interesting, but let's talk about it. Let's try and come up with a solution that balances out everything. Instead, what we do is we raise our hand and we say, you're wrong. And so there's no government. I mean, literally, we're at an impasse. There's no government. And we're throwing rocks at each other. One of the things he says that everybody ought to read, what's his name? Making friends and influencing people. Yeah. He says that book had a lot of truth in it, because you start by saying Where do we agree? Okay, we both agree that oil prices are out of control. Why do you think that? Let me say why I think it. Let's talk about it. Let's figure out, and this needs to be done at the political level, because you and I can come to an agreement. But it would be nice for our friendship to come to an agreement.
And that's difficult to do because everyone comes from their own perspective. And they everything that they believe is crystal clear.
Well,
and it's hard.
That's what he's saying. And what he's saying is what we need to do is we need to understand why that perspective is the way it is. It isn't necessary. It's like I like chocolate and somebody else likes sour candy. Okay. One's not right or wrong. It's just who you are. And so what he's trying to say is we've all got these and we all emphasize something. We're all wrong. I mean, he'll say we're all wrong. I mean, none of us have all the truth. That's why we need each other. And we need to be able to sit down. And if and as Dale Carnegie says, you first of all start by saying something positive about the other. And after you say something positive about the other, if you're I don't like the word pro-life because it isn't necessarily, or pro-choice because it isn't necessarily. I don't, those categories are just, they cause more problems than they solve. Because I don't know anybody that wants abortions, okay? So I say, you come from the pro-life perspective. I don't know if you are or not. I come from the pro-choice. How do we, neither one of us want abortions. Why are we fighting with each other? Why don't we put into policy those things that may not be perfectly mine or perfectly yours, but the number of abortion drops by 40%. Is that better than throwing at each other and have them stay at the level they are now?
When it's possible. I mean, I think they're being off. And we're going to do it.
Okay, we're going.
I've read his mind down, I followed it. Obviously, it was before my time, but I had no question in my mind if you really read his writings and everything he did, he absolutely believed that what he was doing was good.
Right.
I mean, I don't say that.
No. I did my master's thesis on the rise of Nazism in Germany from 1928 to 1939. So
when you get someone then with a polarized like that, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Because you can't say, well, like you see in all the history channels, he was a madman, he was psychotic.
I like I said, my master's thesis was the rise of Nazism in Germany from 1920 to 1939. I think I understand that somewhat well. My thesis advisor was the head chaplain that put the church together in Germany. Okay. But not everybody is Hitler. I mean, have to realize I'm not Hitler, you're not Hitler. The people in Congress are not Hitler as far as we know. Most of us can do reasonable discussions. And I said Sunday, this is probably Pat, Gene, I apologize. I said Sunday in my sermon, we're all made in the image of God. All of us. So that's the baseline. We're all made in the image of God. We've all dirtied that image up. Okay? So you've dirtied it up, I've dirtied it up. We need to clean that off. We'll never get all the grime off, I don't think.
Well, can you tell me something? I mean, open-minded. Can you tell us something positive that President Biden has accomplished?
That's not my job, and I don't want to. I don't want to get into that game. I really don't want to get in that game because then we're getting into. I'm setting that up. I could, but I don't want to get into that. He did this, he didn't do that, he did this, he didn't do that, because that's what it becomes in a tit for tat. And unless we've got time for me to explain to you why I think he did that, which will probably take a significant amount of time, or at least 10 or 15 minutes, it doesn't do any good for me simply to say he's. I think he has. I think he's done a lot, but we need to sit down and talk about it. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so.
Well, we're way over time. What he does is he gives us the example of yin and yang, of dark and light, conservative and liberal. People, I'll close by saying, people ask me if I'm a liberal or conservative. I get that, I do get that asked. And my answer is yes. I'm much more complex than being one or the other. I first of all have to ask you, what do you mean by conservative? And what do you mean by liberal? Because we might actually have different understandings. I don't think, for example, that President Trump's a conservative. I don't think very few of his policies are what I would consider to be conservative policies. That's my opinion. Okay. I am very conservative on some issues. Very conservative. I'm very liberal on other issues. I don't know anyone, do you know anyone that is a pure conservative or a pure liberal? I think people get in their mind they want to be that way, but if you want to ask me what I'm conservative by, I can give you a long list of things I'm conservative. And if you ask if I'm a liberal, I can give you a long list of things that I feel I fall on the liberal side. And I find out when I talk to people, most people are not pure either. And we're getting ourselves into where we want purity. And that's why I titled this, When Morality is Evil. When morality demands purity. When morality demands that everybody think like I think and believe like I believe, then morality becomes evil. I'm better than you are. I'm moral. You're immoral. Oh, what does that mean? No, seriously. Have I ever done things that are immoral? Probably. Probably everyone in this room has. Have I ever done things that were good? Yeah, I hope so. So this purity culture of you're either for me or against me is going to destroy us. Unless
Can you
we,
answer the question with what's happening with the Supreme Court right now? With the threats to the Supreme Court?
okay, let me
But they
come.
don't do anything about that. What
Okay.
Schumer said about you will be taken up. What he said that what's the difference? Why is that happening? Why don't they do anything about
Okay,
it?
see, this is the problem.
That is the
I think,
problem.
no, wait,
That is the problem.
let me answer. This is the problem. If I were a pure liberal, I'd come back and what about those 19 kids that were killed? And how come we haven't done anything about it? And then we start arguing about, okay, why haven't they initiated gun control? What about those 19 kids? Are they less important than the person? We get going in that, and where does it go? Where does it go? Nowhere. Nowhere. What I would like to, the way I would say is, yes, I think we ought to do something about that. I also think that when McConnell said that Obama's, was it Garland? Nominee, well, it's in the same year as an election. We can't consider that. And then the one he puts in, it's within 2 months of the election. Well, if he wants it this way one time, how does he want it this way the other time? How does he go to bed at night and look in the mirror? I mean, how do you say, no, you can't do that, but I can? It used to be, and one of the things he points out, and this is part of the issue, that you couldn't tell how a Supreme Court justice was going to vote by the president that elected that as Supreme Court justice. Eisenhower, Kennedy, they all said, oh, I wouldn't have put him on if I'd known he'd have voted like that, because they were independent. In the last group, now we put people on the Supreme Court who are going to do what I want, not what the Constitution demands. They're going to interpret things the way I want to interpret. Now you can pretty much tell how a person is going to vote by the president that put him in. I do hope we do something about the Supreme Court here.
There won't be anything done, not with Biden in there.
See, that kind of pessimistic attitude is
Well, has
what's
anything
wrong.
been done?
That's
Has
what-
anything been done about Schumer and what he
Th- th-
said?
what-
No. With what's going on
See-
outside the justices' houses, they're threatening to kill those justices.
Well,
and their
they
families.
killed 19 kids down.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It's not all because of the guns.
No, it isn't. No,
That
it
is
isn't.
because of the mental illness of the people. They're fighting to take care of.
No, see what
The
you're
mental
doing
illness.
is you're doing propaganda.
Yeah.
You're doing pure propaganda. You're not asking for an opinion. You're not allowing somebody to say, I think you're wrong. You're just doing propaganda.
It's the
But
proof is
that-
in the pudding.
No,
He's not
no.
doing anything about it.
This is what he's talking about. This is exactly what he's talking
Well,
about.
they want to control one.
But even when you said that about McConnell ruling as Supreme Court justice, what you neglected to say is if you go back over the history of appointments for the past 200 years, it's precedent. So, I mean,
Oh,
if everybody wants their own.
I understand that. I haven't got,
No, you don't, because you just used it as an example and evidence of there's something wrong.
I did, by the way, if you notice, I didn't say, if you notice, I didn't say he did anything wrong. I did not. What I said was he was inconsistent. The issue was his inconsistency. If he'd have done the same thing the last time as he did when Obama was there, I understand that. That's consistent.
And in the words of Mr. B, the Democrat, I think he said, so did Mr. Obama, elections have consequences. So it depends, it just depends on whether you have a marbles or not. I mean, a Supreme Court justice, do you really think a president is going to nominate stuff in any person? Go back to George Washington, he's going to nominate somebody who is completely.
No. I don't expect that. But we used to nominate people that were moderate, conservatives or liberals. We nominated people that, not knowing exactly how they were going to vote on things, we didn't put them in there so we could get something passed.
Will the Democrats? That's different.
See, I'm sorry, all I'm hearing from you is propaganda, and I'm trying not to give propaganda back. To completely demonize, has Biden done things wrong? Yes, I will grant that. Has he done everything wrong?
He's not, I will say he's not really running the country because his mental capacity.
No, you don't know that.
Oh,
You don't know that. No, you don't. You don't know that.
But see, you're a fan, but that's parroted on the oil price. You parroted the news media story and since here, it's gone up $3 a gallon.
But
And you pick that up somewhere without any evidence in that.
It is his fault because he closed all the
What I wanna
pipelines, he
say
closed
is-
everything down.
what I wanted to say was,
No, I'm just saying you're a victim of the
No, wait, let me just finish.
That's all.
All I'm saying is, when you said that, I said, you're right,
That's
thank
true.
you.
But you were saying.
But
as if
that's
it-
why-
as if you knew it to be true.
But that's all of us, that's what he's saying, that is all of us. And that's me, that's you. And as soon as you said that, I said, let me think about it, let's stop.